Jim Carrey was not born into fame. Long before Hollywood paid him millions per film, before he became one of the most recognizable comedic faces in the world, he was simply a shy boy growing up in Ontario, Canada. Born on January 17, 1962, James Eugene Carrey grew up in a working-class family. His father, Percy Carrey, was a talented saxophone player who once dreamed of becoming a professional musician. But like many dreamers, Percy chose stability over passion and became an accountant. For a while, life felt stable, but stability can disappear faster than anyone expects. When Jim was still in school, the Carrey family fell into serious financial trouble. Percy lost his job, and the family was forced into survival mode. He took a new position at a factory producing wheels and tires, but the income wasn't enough. The entire family had to contribute. After school, Jim, his brother, and his sisters didn't go home to relax or meet friends. They went to work. They cleaned floors. They scrubbed toilets. They washed factory corridors late into the night. The future star of Hollywood was mopping industrial bathrooms at an age when most teenagers were worrying about homework or sports. At school, Jim wasn't the loud class clown people imagine. He was shy, quiet, and often withdrawn. But inside, something was building. Humor slowly became his survival mechanism. At home, the pressure grew heavier. Eventually, the family couldn't maintain proper housing and moved into a camper van. For a period of time, they lived together in tight quarters with no privacy and constant uncertainty. His father struggled to find steady work even after relocating to Burlington. The stress inside the family intensified, especially as Jim's mother battled severe hypochondria, a psychological condition in which a person genuinely believes they are seriously ill despite having no medical diagnosis. The atmosphere at home was filled with anxiety and emotional tension. In that environment, Jim discovered something powerful. Whenever his mother felt unwell, he would perform impressions to lift her mood. He twisted his face into exaggerated expressions. He imitated celebrities. He created characters, not because he wanted applause, but because he wanted relief. Laughter was the only medicine that seemed to work inside that small, tense space. Without realizing it, he was training his face, his body, his timing. Comedy wasn't a career choice yet. It was emotional survival. At the age of 15, his father decided it was time to test that talent in the real world. Percy took Jim to a well-known Toronto comedy club called Yuck Yucks. It was a serious stage, filled with adult audiences who expected polished performers, not nervous teenagers. That night, Jim walked onto the stage under bright lights, facing a crowd far more intimidating than anything he had experienced. And it did not go well. The jokes didn't land. The audience grew uncomfortable. Some became irritated. The performance collapsed. He bombed completely. For a teenager already carrying financial stress, family instability, and deep insecurity, that failure was devastating. Many people would have walked away permanently. Many would have decided they simply weren't good enough. But Jim Carrey didn't interpret that night as a final verdict. He saw it as unfinished business. For 2 years, he practiced obsessively. He studied comedians, he analyzed timing, he trained his facial muscles in front of a mirror for hours, developing the elastic expressions that would later define him. He refined impressions, he built characters, he sharpened physical comedy into something uniquely his own. 2 years later, he returned to the same club, same stage, different performer. This time, the crowd didn't sit in silence. They laughed, they responded, they felt his energy. The awkward teenager had transformed into a magnetic presence. That night marked the real beginning. From that point on, Jim Carrey became a regular on the stand-up circuit. Small clubs turned into larger venues. Confidence replaced hesitation. His style became wild, unpredictable, almost electric. Industry insiders started noticing. Television doors began to open, and slowly Hollywood moved from being an impossible dream to a visible destination. By the early 1980s, Jim Carrey was no longer just a struggling teenager experimenting with comedy. He had become a serious stand-up performer. Night after night, he stepped onto small Canadian stages, refining his timing, sharpening his physical control, and pushing his elastic facial expressions further than anyone else dared. His style wasn't traditional, it wasn't safe, it was explosive. Some audiences didn't understand him, others were mesmerized. But one thing was certain, he was different. Eventually, Canada became too small for his ambition. Jim moved to Los Angeles, the city where dreams are either realized or destroyed. Like thousands before him, he arrived with hope, raw talent, and almost no guarantees. The early days in Hollywood were humbling. He performed at the Comedy Store, one of the most respected stand-up venues in America. The competition was ruthless. Every comedian on that stage believed they were the next big star. Many never made it. Jim's early performances in Los Angeles were uneven. Some nights he dominated the room with unstoppable energy. Other nights, executives watched him with confusion. His comedy was intensely physical, almost cartoonish. He bent his body in unnatural ways. He transformed his face into living animation. Some saw genius. Others saw someone too strange for mainstream television. But persistence was his greatest weapon. In 1982, he received one of his first national television appearances on The Tonight Show. For any comedian, that stage was sacred. It was validation, it was exposure, and it proved that Jim Carrey was no longer just a club performer. He was entering the American entertainment system. Still, success did not arrive instantly. Throughout the 1980s, he appeared in small television roles and low-budget films. Projects came and went. None turned him into a household name. He was close enough to taste recognition, yet far from true breakthrough. Hollywood can be cruel in that way. It keeps you hopeful, but never satisfied. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. In 1990, Jim joined a new sketch comedy television series called In Living Color. The show was bold, edgy, and different from traditional comedy programs of the time. It allowed performers to take risks. It rewarded originality. And for Jim Carrey, it was the perfect playground. On that stage, he unleashed characters that felt almost superhuman. Fire Marshal Bill, with his scarred face and chaotic energy. Vera DeMilo, exaggerated and absurd. His physical control became legendary. He wasn't just telling jokes. He was transforming his entire body into comedy. Audiences finally saw what he had been building for years. The show gave him national exposure in America. Casting directors began to pay attention. Studio executives realized that this wild, rubber-faced performer had something rare. He was unforgettable. And then came 1994. In Hollywood history, very few actors experience a single year that completely redefines their destiny. For Jim Carrey, 1994 was not just successful, it was historic. First came Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. The studio had modest expectations. The character was strange, loud, over the top. Critics were skeptical, but audiences loved it. Jim's fearless performance turned Ace Ventura into a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, his exaggerated physicality was no longer too much. It was revolutionary. Just months later, he starred in The Mask. This film allowed him to combine live-action performance with cartoon-like energy in a way no other actor could. His face moved like animation. His body defied realism. It was as if the struggling boy who once practiced in front of a mirror had been preparing for this exact role his entire life. And then, in the same year, came Dumb and Dumber. 3 major hit comedies. One year, Hollywood had no choice but to acknowledge what was happening. Jim Carrey was not a side performer. He was a leading man. Studios began offering him contracts at a level that was almost unheard of for a comedic actor at the time. Soon, he became the first comedian to command a $20 million salary for a single film. From living in a van to becoming one of the highest-paid actors in the world, the transformation felt almost unreal. But behind the unstoppable laughter and box office dominance, something deeper was beginning to shift. Fame magnifies everything. Success amplifies identity. And when the world sees you as a source of constant laughter, it becomes harder to reveal anything else. As the 1990s progressed, Jim Carrey began searching for something beyond comedy, and that search would change the trajectory of his career forever. By the late 1990s, Jim Carrey had achieved something most comedians only dream of. He had global recognition, financial security, and complete creative freedom. Studios trusted his name. Audiences showed up automatically. His face alone could sell a film. But inside, something was evolving. Comedy had given him survival. Fame had given him power, yet neither had given him peace. Many people saw him as the loudest man in the room, the unstoppable force of energy. But Jim began to feel confined by that image. Hollywood loved his exaggerated characters. The rubber face, the explosive movement, the chaos, yet he wanted to prove something deeper, not to the audience, but to himself. In 1998, he accepted a role that surprised many. The Truman Show was not a typical comedy. It was quiet, philosophical, subtle. Jim played Truman Burbank, a man unknowingly living his entire life inside a constructed reality television set. The performance required restraint, emotional control, vulnerability. For the first time, audiences saw Jim Carrey without constant exaggeration. They saw sadness behind the smile, confusion behind the humor. The film was both a commercial and critical success. More importantly, it proved that he was not just a comedian, he was an actor, but he didn't stop there. In 1999, he immersed himself in one of the most intense roles of his career. Man on the Moon. The film told the story of eccentric comedian Andy Kaufman. To prepare, Jim didn't just study Kaufman, he became him. On set, he reportedly stayed in character constantly. Cast and crew described the experience as surreal. It was as if Jim had dissolved his own identity to fully inhabit another. The performance earned critical praise and awards recognition, yet the process left a mark. When an actor erases the line between self and character, something shifts internally. For Jim, that line was already fragile. Fame had given him everything he once thought he wanted, but fulfillment remained distant. As the 2000s began, he continued taking varied roles, balancing comedy with deeper material. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. In this film, he portrayed a man attempting to erase painful memories of a failed relationship. The performance was quiet, intimate, and emotionally raw. Critics praised it as one of the finest performances of his career. Many viewers were stunned. The same actor who once spoke through his backside in Ace Ventura was now delivering subtle, heartbreaking realism. But success does not shield anyone from internal struggle. Throughout interviews in later years, Jim openly discussed battling depression. He spoke about taking medication during certain periods of his life. He described reaching the peak of fame and realizing it did not solve deeper questions about identity and meaning. When the world sees you as a symbol of joy, admitting sadness becomes complicated. Over time, he began distancing himself from the traditional Hollywood machine. Fewer blockbuster comedies, more selective appearances, public interviews that felt philosophical rather than promotional. He spoke about ego as an illusion, about the idea that Jim Carrey was simply a constructed character, much like Truman Burbank living inside a set. Some audiences were confused by this transformation. Others admired his honesty. He also turned toward painting and visual art, using canvas as another form of expression. In interviews, he described art as freedom, a space where he could exist without expectation, without box office numbers, without performance pressure. From the outside, it appeared as if he was stepping away from the spotlight that had once defined him. But perhaps for the first time, he was stepping toward himself. The boy who once made his mother laugh to relieve household tension had built an empire out of comedy. Yet the man he became was searching for something quieter, something internal, something not dependent on applause. And that search continues to define Jim Carrey today. In many ways, Jim Carrey achieved what millions only imagine. He escaped poverty. He conquered Hollywood. He became one of the highest-paid actors of his generation. He proved his dramatic depth. He left a permanent mark on comedy history. But his story was never just about success. It was about identity, about the masks we wear to survive. As a child, he learned that laughter could reduce tension, that humor could protect a fragile home, that performance could create temporary safety. Over time, that survival tool became a global brand. The world didn't just laugh with Jim Carrey. It expected him to laugh forever. Yet fame can become another kind of mask. In interviews later in life, he spoke openly about the illusion of the self. He questioned the idea of a fixed identity. He described Jim Carrey as a character the world created and consumed. It echoed the themes of The Truman Show, a man living inside expectations built by others. Perhaps that is why the role felt so personal. There is a quiet irony in his journey. The shy boy who once struggled to be seen eventually became one of the most visible faces on the planet. The teenager who bombed on stage became a box office phenomenon. The family that lived in a van raised a man who earned more in a single film than they once could have imagined in a lifetime. And yet beyond the numbers, beyond the awards, beyond the unforgettable characters, there remains a human being who searched for meaning beyond applause. Jim Carrey did not simply reinvent comedy, he expanded it. He showed that physical humor could feel like animation, that dramatic vulnerability could live inside a comedian, that fame does not eliminate internal questions, it magnifies them. Today, whether he appears in films, gives philosophical interviews, or paints in solitude, he remains unpredictable, uncontained, refusing to be reduced to one version of himself. Maybe that is the real story. Not the money, not the fame, not even the laughter, but the evolution from survival to superstardom to self-exploration. The boy who once practiced faces in the mirror was not preparing for Hollywood. He was preparing for life, for reinvention, for resilience, for transformation. Jim Carrey's journey reminds us of something simple yet powerful. Success can change your circumstances, but understanding yourself changes everything. And perhaps the greatest performance of his life was not on screen. It was learning how to live beyond it.